Accelerated learning binaural beats. Listen to these California Green Building Standards Code guidelines to review for the California Supplemental exam. Ensure you consult the most up-to-date version of the California Building Standards Code, Title 24, Part 11, CalGreen. This recording will review Chapter 5, Section 5.2 to 5.5, Non-Residential Mandatory Measures. Play the audio before you sleep or when you wake up in a relaxed state. Repeat the code guideline and use your imagination to apply it to what you already know. Let this learning tool guide you, knowing you will succeed. Let's begin. CalGreen Section 5.2 is all about energy efficiency. The intent is to recognize that the California Energy Commission retains authority over energy standards. The intent of this section is to reduce dependency on non-renewable energy and to improve the efficiency of our buildings. For all intents and purposes, CalGreen says just refer to the California Energy Code. That is the end of Section 5.2. 5.3 is all about water efficiency and conservation. It begins with guidelines to reduce potable water use in new and altered buildings by making people aware of their daily potable water consumption. This helps encourage reduction in daily potable water use. It also gives the building operator an ability to isolate and identify building areas with increases in water usage. Let's review the guidelines for separate submeter requirements in this section. Separate submeters must be provided for new buildings or additions in excess of 50,000 square feet. You must install separate submeters for the following: for each individual leased or rented tenant space in a building, projected to consume more than 100 gallons per day. These places include laundry or cleaners, food services, medical offices, or salons. Next, separate submeter requirements. Where separate submeters for individual building tenants are not feasible, then submeters installed should be to these subsystems only. 1. Makeup water for cooling towers where flow is greater than 500 gallons per minute. 2. Where makeup water for evaporative coolers are greater than 6 gallons per minute. 3. Steam and hot water boilers with less than 500,000 BTUs an hour of energy. Separate submeters are also required for a tenant in a new building or addition if they're going to be consuming greater than 1,000 gallons of water a day. These types of spaces or buildings could be car washes or aquariums. The next set of guidelines in Section 5.3 have to do with maximum allowable flow rates for plumbing fixtures and fittings, including water closets, urinals, and shower heads. The California Energy Commission adopts regulations to establish the minimum water flow rates for fixtures and fittings. Let's begin by discussing showerhead flow rates. A showerhead flow rate maximum is 1.8 gallons per minute at 80 psi. The flush volume of all water closets shall not exceed 1.28 gallons per flush. Wall-mounted urinals must not exceed 0.125 gallons per flush, and floor-mounted urinals must not exceed 0.5 gallons per flush. Let's review this flashcard again. Shower heads flow rate should be a maximum of 1.8 gallons per minute at 80 psi. The pressure for the shower head at 80 psi is the highest compared to other fixture types, and 1.8 gallons per minute is also higher than other fixture types. That's a good way to remember the shower head. The flush volume for water closets shall not exceed 1.28 gallons per flush. and between wall-mounted and floor-mounted urinals. A wall-mounted urinal is less in terms of the gallons per flush. It must not exceed 0.125 gallons per flush, whereas the floor-mounted urinal allows for a greater amount of water, which is 0.5 gallons per flush. Next, let's discuss faucets and fountain requirements for non-residential buildings. Lavatory faucet maximum flow rate must be 0.5 gallons per minute at 60 psi. Kitchen faucet maximum flow rate is 1.8 gallons per minute at 60 psi. There may be a temporary increase of up to 2.2 gallons per minute at 60 psi for a kitchen faucet, as long as it returns back to the previous maximum mentioned of 1.8 gallons per minute at 60 psi. So here it's saying that it can fluctuate between 1.8 to 2.2, as long as the main setting of the kitchen faucet is at 1.8 gallons per minute at 60 psi. Wash fountains must have a maximum of 1.8 gallons per minute at 60 psi. Metering faucets, a maximum of 0.2 gallons per cycle, and the same for metering faucets for wash fountains. Food waste disposers shall modulate the use of water to 1 gallon per minute when not in use, and up to 8 gallons per minute when in use. It should shut off after 10 minutes of inactivity. The intent is to reduce the overall use of potable water within a building. This decreases the energy needed to transport, process, and treat water, thus reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Plumbing fixtures and fittings must be installed per the California Plumbing Code. The code redefines lead-free plumbing to reduce the amount of lead in potable water fittings and fixtures. The next section of 5.3 intends to reduce the overall outdoor water used for irrigation for new landscaping and rehabilitated landscaping for non-residential projects. Compliance is achieved by meeting the State California Department of Water Resources MWELO or Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, or by abiding with the local MWELO. For public schools and community colleges, they must comply with the State Water Resources MWELO. For new constructed landscapes with an aggregate landscape of 500 square feet or greater, they must comply. Or rehabilitated landscapes with an aggregate landscape area equal to or greater than 1,200 square feet. Let's repeat that. For public schools and community colleges, they must comply with State MWELO ordinance. For new constructed landscapes with aggregate landscape of 500 square feet or greater, then they must comply. For rehabilitated landscapes with an aggregate landscape area equal to or greater than 1,200 square feet, they also must comply. Next, we move on to 5.4, material conservation and resource efficiency. Material conservation through protecting buildings from moisture, construction waste, recycling materials, and building commissioning. The intent of Section 5.4 is to provide a weather-resistant exterior wall and foundation envelope to increase the integrity and longevity of the structure. The ultimate goal is to achieve greenhouse gas reduction. Section 5.4 begins with moisture control guidelines to minimize the amount of moisture entering and remaining within a wall assembly, and to protect from water intrusion at exterior entries from wind-driven rain, and to minimize water damage at exterior walls from possible effects of irrigation sprinkler systems. Moisture control measures. Guidelines begin by stating that you must prevent irrigation systems from spraying on structures. Exterior entries. Doors must provide protection from wind-driven rain via the following three solutions: You can provide a 4-foot awning, a 4-foot roof overhang over the door, or a 4-foot recessed door. You can also provide flashing that's integrated with the drainage plane. The next set of guidelines in 5.4 are all about waste reduction from new construction and demolition that would be sent to landfills. It encourages material resource efficiency through reuse and recycling of construction waste products. The first guideline talks about recycling a minimum of 65% of non-hazardous construction and demolition waste, per this section or a local ordinance. If the jurisdiction has no waste management ordinance, then the project must submit a construction waste management plan that does the following. First, it must identify the reuse or recycling of materials for future use. It must identify sorted on-site or bulk mixed construction and demolition materials. Or it must identify diversion facilities to take waste, or specify if they're calculating the amount of waste by either weight or volume, not both. This section also talks about use of a waste management company to verify the construction and demolition waste material that is diverted from a landfill. The owner and contractor can decide to do this. Also, the section discusses the combined weight of new construction disposal that does not exceed 2 pounds per square foot. Then buildings can be applied towards that 65% minimum requirement. For additions and alterations, universal waste disposed correctly can be diverted from landfills. 100% of trees, stumps, rocks, and vegetation and soils from land clearing shall be reused and recycled. If contaminated soils occur on the land clearing, then the County of Agriculture Commissioner or the California Department of Food and Agriculture maps must be consulted. The intent of all these guidelines is to ensure that universal waste is properly disposed. There are 7 categories of hazardous waste in the CCR, California Code of Regulations, Title 22, that can be managed as universal waste. Discarded fluorescent lamps are hazardous waste. Even low mercury lamps or batteries are not allowed to be discarded in ordinary trash. The intent of reusing or recycling land clearing is to really reduce high volumes of site materials from filling up landfills as a result of clearing, and to encourage the market for non-hazardous land clearing debris. This is not intended, however, for brownfield sites. CalRecycle provides mixed construction and demolition debris processors. Landfill facilities may fall under the authority of the state and local regulatory agencies, including the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, CalRecycle, and local enforcement agencies. On the CalRecycle homepage under the Construction and Debris section, or by simply checking the California Waste Services website, recycling can cost anywhere from $150 per ton for mixed construction and debris, or C&D, or for wood waste, $85 per ton, or for drywall, $65 per ton. By charging for construction and debris waste, the project and contractor is incentivized to produce less waste from the construction process. As of July 1st, 2024, life cycle assessment needs to be conducted for new constructions, alterations, and additions. First, where there is 100,000 square feet or greater of combined altered floor area under the Building Standards Commission regulated buildings, or For DSA regulated projects for new construction, additions, and alterations of 50,000 square feet or greater combined altered floor area. And just as a note, for future purposes, in July of 2026, Building Standards Commission regulated buildings will go from 100,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet or greater to trigger that life cycle assessment that needs to be conducted. Projects under the life cycle assessment must include a cradle-to-grave whole building life cycle assessment. They must reference a study period that's equal to a reference baseline and shall be 60 years. It must be a cradle-to-grave assessment. It must exclude operating energy for a building. It must show a minimum 10% reduction in global warming potential, or GWP. And the analysis must include building enclosure components, such as glazing assemblies, insulation, exterior finishes. Primary and secondary structural members should be limited to footings and foundations, and structures should include column, beam, wall, roof, and floors. Let's discuss at a high level what a life cycle assessment includes. It starts with the production stage, where you have raw material extraction, then transport of materials to a factory, where the product is manufactured. At that point, it's called cradle to gate. The next stage would be the construction stage, where you transport the products to the construction site and install them. The next stage is the use stage, which includes maintenance, repair, replacement, or refurbishment. And finally, the last stage would be end of life, which includes deconstruction, demolition, transport of waste to disposal or processing sites. At this stage, we would call it a cradle-to-grave assessment. And again, remember, it excludes operating energy. A copy of the whole building life cycle assessment, which includes the global warming potential analysis, plus a maintenance and training information, should be included in the operation and maintenance manual, which is to be provided to the owner at the close of construction. A table further lists the product global warming potential limits. If a material that is permitted, installed, and is listed in this table, then it must have a Type 3 Environmental Product Declaration, or an EPD. Products should not exceed the global warming potential values in this CalGreen table in section 5.4. A prescriptive path for products with global warming potential compliance. Here's a prescriptive path. First, the products installed and listed must be per the table in CalGreen section 5.4. Next, Type 3 EPDs, including those such as structural steel, glass, mineral wool board, insulation, and concrete, can be part of that declaration. And finally, the EPD product or factory-specific product must not exceed the global warming potential limit. The next set of guidelines support existing law to provide areas for recycling by occupants based on the California Solid Waste Reuse and Recycling Access Act of 1991. The recycling requirements by occupants are as follows. Provide areas for non-hazardous recycling that serve the entire building. Additions that result in 30% increased floor area should also provide recycling areas on site. The next guideline in 5.4 intends to improve public health, safety, and general welfare of the public by ensuring that design and construction of buildings reduce negative environmental impacts and promote occupant comfort. Commissioning ensures that the building functions in the manner that it was intended. Here are the requirements. New buildings, 10,000 square feet or more, require building commissioning. The following are the requirements for commissioning. There are 7 of them in this list, part of the commissioning requirements. The first Owner's Project Requirements, or OPR. Next, basis of design must be included. Next, you must show commissioning measures in construction documents. Next, you must show a commissioning plan. Then, a functional performance testing. Then, documentation and training. And finally, a commissioning report. The exceptions for commissioning include unconditioned warehouse, areas that are less than 10,000 square feet, such as offices within an unconditioned space, or tenant improvements less than 10,000 square feet, or open parking garages. Commissioning ensures that a building functions as intended. Let's now discuss further each of those items in that list of 7 for commissioning, starting with the Owner's Project Requirements, OPR. The OPR should be done before design phase begins. It must document the environmental and sustainability goals, the building sustainability goals, indoor environmental quality requirements, project program including hours of operation, equipment and system expectations, and building occupant and operations and maintenance personnel expectations. The next commissioning requirement listed is the basis of design, which is completed at the design phase, and it shows how the design meets the owner's project requirements from the previous step in 3 particular areas. Number 1, basis of design must show the renewable energy is met. Second, landscape irrigation. And third, water reuse. The next commissioning requirement in the list is developing a commissioning plan to be completed prior to permit issuance, and this must include project information, commissioning goals, systems to be commissioned, commissioning team information and their training and certifications, and schedules. The next commissioning requirement is functional performance testing, which is a report addressing each building component that was tested, the methods of testing, and readings and adjustments made. For new construction buildings, the next requirement for commissioning applies: documentation and training. System manual requirements must include OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Act requirements. And final commissioning requirement is a commissioning report that is provided to the owner at the end for new construction buildings. New buildings less than 10,000 square feet or new systems serving alterations and additions providing testing and adjusting of systems include the following systems. Number 1, renewable energy systems. Number 2, landscape irrigation systems. And number 3, water reuse systems. This brings us to the last section of Chapter 5, Section 5.5, about environmental quality. The first set of guidelines in this section is intended to prevent use of indoor air for combustion and to prevent contaminated air from escaping a fireplace, and helps maintain indoor air quality requirements. Here are the requirements for a fireplace. Install only a direct vent sealed combustion gas, or a sealed wood-burning fireplace, or a sealed wood stove that complies with US EPA standards, or a pellet stove that also complies with US EPA standards. The next guideline in 5.5 is to allow limited use of permanent heating and cooling systems during construction, and requires the use of a MERV 8 air filter. The intent is to control air pollutants for workers during construction and to ensure good air quality when the building is turned over to the owner. Pollutant control during construction. The following requirements. A MERV 8 return filter should be used for HVAC systems per ASHRAE 52, or a filter with an average efficiency of 30%. Also, you must replace filters at the end of construction. Next, you must cover duct openings to reduce dust in the system during construction. The goal here is to enhance HVAC equipment efficiency and indoor air quality by preventing construction debris from building up in air ducts during construction. The next set of guidelines in 5.5 is intended to reduce volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, of finished materials on projects, thus improving air quality for building occupants. Low VOC guidelines are based on those developed by the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. The first set of guidelines begin with adhesives, sealants, caulks, which must comply with local regional air pollution control or air quality management districts, AQMDs, or the South Coast Air Quality Management District, SCAQMD limits. Adhesives for carpet, wood floor, ceramic, BCT, welding, roof, deck, roads, paints, and coatings must be complied with. Low VOC guidelines are produced by CARB. The California Department of Public Health, or CDPH, maintains standards and procedures for testing volatile organic compound limits. Section 5.5 provides many tables with products and VOC limits. Where resilient flooring is installed, 80% of the floor must meet the California Department of Public Health standards. Thermal insulation must also meet California Department of Health standards. In mechanically ventilated buildings, a MERV 13 must be used prior to occupancy. For outdoor smoking areas, no smoking is permitted within 25 feet of building entries, air intakes, and windows. The next guideline regarding indoor moisture control is intended to reduce mold and mildew growth for building occupants. Section 5.5 directs you to CBC Chapter 14 for exterior wall guidelines, and Section 5.407.2.2 of CalGreen, all about entries and openings, which was covered in this recording. Under the Division of State Architect Regulations, carbon dioxide or CO2 monitoring in K-12 classrooms now have an updated requirement as of July 1st, 2024. K-12, each classroom must have a CO2 monitor 3 to 6 feet above the floor and 5 feet away from openings and doors. There must be a notification when CO2 levels are exceeding 1,100 parts per million. The CO2 detector must measure CO2 levels every 15 minutes and include up to 30 days worth of data in the system. The next set of guidelines in 5.5 is intended to keep sound levels low enough to carry out activities inside a building without distraction and discomfort from noisy areas. The first acoustical guideline has to do with acoustical control with STC, or Sound Transmission Class Ratings, and OITC, Outdoor-Indoor Transmission Class Ratings. The requirements in Division of the State Architect Regulated Buildings apply to new construction. Wall, ceiling, roof assemblies must have an SDC of at least 50 and an outside indoor transmission class rating greater than 40. Exterior windows must have an SDC greater than 40 and an OITC greater than 30. Noise levels must not exceed 50 decibels in interior spaces. Interior sound transmission between offices must provide for an STC 40 or greater. Other exterior features, including sound walls and earth berms, can be utilized to mitigate sound migration into the building. The next guideline eliminates the use of chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, and halons in fire suppression, HVAC, and refrigeration systems to assist in meeting the state reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and to prevent ozone destruction. The requirements include installing HVAC, fire suppression, and refrigerant equipment that don't contain CFCs and halons. Refrigerants are regulated at the federal level by the EPA. This concludes Chapter 5, Non-Residential Mandatory Measures in CalGreen.